I became a film critic the way most people become film critics, by accident. In a way, my career in criticism began as a student when I was at the Faculty of English in Cambridge in the 1980s. And in those days, you could get hit over the knuckles with a ruler for suggesting you wanted to study cinema. Film studies was utterly unheard of. It had the same relationship that English studies had to the classics in the 19th century in a way. Now, of course, it's completely different. But when I came up to Cambridge, it was a very interesting time because Colin McCabe, the great Goddard specialist, had just been effectively denied tenure at Cambridge over a row about his evident adherence to structuralism and to critical theory. And in those days, theory was the hot button issue. Now, fast forward 10 or 15 years or so later, and I am working professionally in journalism. And then after 10 years on the Evening Standard as a general journalist, I get offered a job kind of out of the blue on The Guardian as a film critic, which was a wonderful thing. I thought all my Christmases and birthdays had come at once because I had no conception that anybody was going to actually let me do for a living what I wanted to do anyway, which was an amazing thing. But I came into criticism in 1999, which is an interesting historical moment to enter the profession of criticism. And I found that, of course, theory, critical theory, was the whole question completely absent from journalism. That theory was a complete, it was something in the far shores of theoretical refinement and sophistication, and who cares about that? What I became aware of is that, in fact, there is a theoretical debate about criticism, and that is, should critics be allowed to exist at all? Had effectively digital technology and market forces effectively rendered critics obsolete? And for the next 10, 15 years, I periodically appeared on panels at film festivals, and they agonizingly went over and over and over again the same subject. Surely the film critic is a dinosaur. Surely the film critic is dead now. Surely the web and social media and bloggers have rendered the film critic dead. And it's weird. It didn't seem to apply to any other realm of arts criticism. Nobody had great big seminars about, has architectural criticism died? Has literary criticism died? Has music criticism died? All these things didn't seem to apply. But perhaps as a byproduct of the democratic nature of film and the democratic nature of film criticism, this was a hot button issue. That are film critics dead? But then something very strange happened. Film critics weren't dead. There seem to be millions of them. There are more and more and more film critics. The streets of every city are swarming with film critics, as far as I can see. The danger is they're just not getting paid. That's it. There is a crisis, not in the nature of the commitment to film criticism at all. And I think that actually newspapers are not sacking their film critics in the way that people thought they would, in the way that some newspapers and magazines have been in the US and in Canada. In fact, I don't think they have. But what has happened, I think, is that there are just as many people in their early 20s wanting to be film critics in a way that interestingly, I never did. I didn't want to be a film critic in a way that I meet lots of young men and women in their early 20s who want to be film critics. But it seems to me there are loads of people who want to be film critics in a way that they want to be novelists or they want to be screenwriters. They have a sense that this is what they want to do, but like any tyro novelist or whatever, they don't expect to earn a living during doing it in a way that they might have wanted to or thought they would 20 or 30 years ago. So that, in a way, is kind of where I'm at, or that where the milieu, the context of where my work is at. There was a certain amount of movie writing to be done in student journalism, and the Cambridge Film Festival still existed. I mean, it sort of stopped existing, and now it started existing again. And there was the old arts cinema in Cambridge, which had a very good repertory kind of presence in Cambridge. And I saw a lot of great movies there. I saw a lot of classics there, and I'm very grateful for a part of my unofficial education, in a way, at the old arts cinema in Cambridge. And it was where I became aware of people talking about things like the tracking shot and these impossibly exciting and arcane phrases like that. I remember seeing a lecturer who was then very fashionable, now rather neglected, called Stephen Heath in Cambridge, talking about the tracking shot at the beginning of A Touch of Evil, The Touch of Evil. and how it coincided with the kiss at the end of it. And I remember listening to that lecture, Heath's lecture, and thinking, wow, nothing I have read, nothing I've written has prepared me for this particular type of criticism, of actually approaching movies and taking them seriously and taking them to pieces and taking the nuts and bolts apart and looking at how they achieve their effects. That is something fascinating. And interestingly, that is something I think is neglected in criticism. Back in the day, back in the musty old tweed-wearing days of Cambridge criticism, people had something called practical criticism, where they would focus in on a verse of a poem or a passage of a novel and really scrutinize it in detail. And weirdly, that, I think, is an aspect of criticism which is completely neglected in professional newspaper journalism. I don't see people saying, actually, you know what? Let's look at 40 seconds of Mean Streets. Let's not talk about Mean Streets, Jenna. Let's look at 40 seconds and really look at the kind of molecular level of this movie and see how it works. That's my next frontier, in a way, of criticism. Nowadays, film studies in the universities is very theoretical. As I say, I find that a little bit opaque now. It's a long time since I've read theory really seriously. And it might be a little bit opaque, I sense, for 18, 19, 20-year-olds to get sort of stuck into. And that, I think, is a bit of a shame. The other critic, I have to say, that I first came across, the first film critic I think I came across as a student, actual film critic, was Judith Williamson, who is a brilliant and I think neglected critic. And she wrote a brilliant book. As I say, it was a very media studies book. It was Media Studies avant la lettre. She wrote a book called Decoding Advertisements, which I came across in the library. And I started turning over its pages, and I was absolutely hooked by it. It was an absolutely brilliant and addictive book, which basically all it did was just take advertisements and say, take a look at this advertisement, now take another look and see how it achieves its effects. And again, I was gobsmacked. I thought, my God, Judith Williamson is right. Something which I thought was obvious, something which I thought I could take at face value is not in fact to be taken at face value. There are determinant factors at play and determinant factors operating in a way behind my back, which I didn't know anything about. And although it wasn't about the movies, it wasn't about cinema, that book, in a way, was very formative for me. I thought, wow, here's somebody saying, look, there's something you don't know about. And there's something that other people aren't telling you about. The, as it were, the straight world is not telling you about this. And it wasn't until later I knew a little bit more about Judith Williamson, because hers, I think, was the first, in a much more obvious and a more mainstream middleweight way. She wrote the first film review I ever read, which filled me with a passionate desire to go and see the film. And it was her feminist account of Scorsese's Raging Bull. And it was in the old City Limits magazine, now sadly long since defunct. But it was an absolutely brilliant review. It was very straightforward. It was very accessible. It was in the best tradition of democratic, accessible cinema criticism. And it was suffused with passion and evangelism. And I thought, my God, I almost put the magazine down and got on the phone to book tickets. That's what you did in those days. You got on the phone to book tickets. And I did it almost there and then. And I thought, my goodness, that's what criticism is. It's using live ammo. It's using live ammunition. It's real. It's not just saying, here we are, blah, 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 and now turn the page and think about something else. It actually intervenes in your life. It's not, in a way, like reading a critical account of Pride and Prejudice, because you can understand or not understand Pride and Prejudice. You could agree with the account of Pride and Prejudice or disagree with it, but you're not making any real difference to Jane Austen's life in the cultural marketplace. Whereas this kind of criticism, you were. I've always wanted to make movies. I've never sat down and thought, I hate this movie. I am going to break it. I am going to kick its ass. It is going to die at death at the box office, and I'm going to make sure that happens. That is a neurotic fantasy, not really of filmmakers, but of everybody in general. The idea of the nasty, mean-spirited critic who's going to break a film. And apart from anything else, I don't think I have that negative ability that somebody like, for example, it sometimes says that Frank Rich, the legendary theatre critic on the New York Times, he had that ability to close a show. He could literally close it. That is to say, the show would open on Wednesday, his review would appear on Wednesday night, the show would close on Thursday, end of story. I'm quite clear in my mind, of course, if I don't like some art house movie, that's not good news. If I don't like it, The Guardian doesn't like it, no, that's not good news. But I don't think I have that ability to break a film, and that's 1,000,000 trillion miles away from what I want to do in criticism, is to intervene. If I don't like a movie, I want other people to see it, weirdly. I have a kind of paradoxical, counterintuitive evangelism for the same movie and say, go and see it and measure your opinion against mine. And that's honestly what I want to do. I think on the other side of the coin, the positive side of that coin, what I do want to do is evangelize in a straightforward and unironic, unparadoxical way for the films that I think are good, because I think this is another bee in my bonnet. One of the great, I suppose, ironies of critics is that they are the least critical people in media and journalism. They get the films, they're presented with them, and they eat up what's on their plate like good little girls and boys, and they duly churn out their reviews, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs waggle, whatever. But they are kind of uncritical. They do what they're told. They're told, these are the films out this week, you will review them, and we duly do. What there isn't enough of is the kind of criticism that, in their various ways, Richard Brody and The New Yorker has espoused, and also Mark Kermode in the BBC, has said, look, why don't we go out and find movies and talk about them? They may not be released in the conventional sense, but we can get them released, we can get them talked about, we can get them seen, we can set up individual screenings, we can set up pop-up screenings, we can do what we want. And there isn't enough of that. That's the proactive criticism. And it's something that only critics can do, interestingly. It's something that you think, well, anybody can do that, surely. Anybody, any interested party, any journalist or anything like that, anybody with a blog can do that. But funnily enough, only critics with their bully pulpit can actually do that. And that's something that people can, that critics could and should be doing. I sometimes think that people think that critics are mean-spirited and cantankerous and reactionary people who are frustrated creative people. Now, that might be true in some. My experience is that they genuinely aren't. That anybody who has arrived at a position where they are writing about movies day in, day out means that just through some form of Darwinian selection, these are the people who love it. They're not the people who hate it. Just the sheer pounding of it means that you couldn't do it if you felt mean-spirited or anything like that. You just physically couldn't do it. Some filmmakers and critics dislike critics and dislike criticism. My feeling is that it tends to be the people who owe most to critics dislike them the most. It's not the big blockbuster people. It's not the huge big names. It's not Roland Emmerich, people like that. They don't care about critics. It tends to be people who have kind of come up through the same channels in a way as the critic. And the only thing, well, not the only thing, but one of the things I would say is I've never had any issue whatever in saying the critic is a lower order of being than the creative person. There's no doubt about it in my mind. They are lower down in the totem pole. But what is interesting is that they are answerable to the same people that the creative person is answerable to, which is to say the public, the creative author, the creative screenwriter, the filmmaker, the poet, the novelist, the playwright, whatever that, is answerable to the public in the end. And so is the critic. The critic is answerable to the same people. They have a kind of analog relationship, if a subservient relationship. So those are the things that I think but people don't understand. And also people think, perhaps they think that being a critic is sort of easy. And I don't know what I want to say. It kind of is easy when you're doing it right in a funny way. The more you're doing it right, the easier it becomes in a funny way. But it feels easier because the success of a film induces clarity in your mind. And the more clarity that's induced, the easier the words flow from your fingertips onto the computer keyboard. But it is hard work. I mean, you're not just going to see movies and goofing off, which is great. Of course you are. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's not like being a miner or a carer or an NHS worker. I'm not under any illusion about the privileged nature of what I'm doing. But you do have to write and you do have to put on a performance, because one of the things that's happened with Web 2.0, and critics are occasionally astonished and horrified to discover this, is that they themselves are eligible for criticism. They themselves can be criticized. They themselves can find themselves being told that their review isn't very good, isn't very well written, or even, most mortifyingly of all, told that it's not as well written as some other person that you're a bit of a rival with. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. I mean, I remember when I started out in criticism and journalism, we would be mocked and derided by creative people saying, who is this fellow who's the film reviewer? What qualifications has he or she got to criticize my work? And of course, we would bridle at that. And then later on, when Web 2.0 came in, I would hear exactly the same critics furious at people below the line commenting on them or tweeting against them saying, who the hell are these people? What qualifications have they got to criticize me and my glorious career, the corpus of my work in professional newspaper criticism? How dare they? And so there's an appalling irony. And it's still not widely discussed. It's still not widely discussed that Web 2.0 broke a one-party state in publishing and media, a one-party state that had existed unbroken and unchallenged since 1475, the invention of the printing press, basically. I mean, that one-party state had continued for centuries until the World Wide Web. And that's what happened. It's a sensational, revolutionary event, and it's still not very widely discussed. You have to engage the reader in a primal way, the idea that here is this film, my opinion is important, your opinion is important. The confluence of my opinion and your opinion is important, and you going to see the film as important as well. It's not just what the danger is if you just go through the motions. You say, here's a movie, blah, 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 blah. You know, and I know that we can't make any difference to this gigantic thing that's a huge elephant that's lumbering across the screen. We can't, shoot with our little pea shooter, try to deflect its course in some way or alter its behavior or modify its direction in any way. Of course, that's not quite what you're doing, but you're certainly trying to analyze it and show the reader that they can analyze it too. That what you're doing is suggesting ways of thinking about cinema, which is something that in which they can participate. Because I think just as cinema at its best is a democratic medium, so is criticism as well. I mean, and that's the exciting thing about criticism. The exciting thing about cinema criticism is that you're writing about something that everybody can go and see. Where I often have a bit of a beef with, dare I say, the theatre, the West End theatre. It's changed a little bit now that theatre has been beamed into cinemas, but you write a review of, let's say, for example, Sam Mendes' new movie, or write an article about Sam Mendes' new movie, and people think, that's great. Let's say I write a review or an article or what have you about Sam Mendes' new movie, and people can say, wow, that's absolutely great. That's fascinating. I'm not sure whether I agree, but I'm interested in going to see that film. Tell me, where is it on? Where can I see it? And you, as it were, come back and say, well, if you don't live in a big city, you might have a problem. But not so much of a problem as you have if I was talking about one of Sam Mendes' theatre productions, then you'd be completely stuffed. But let's say it's one of Sam Mendes, let's say his James Bond movies where you can see it. Guess what? You can see it. It's on 5 or 6 times a day on 5 or 6 screens. And here's the deal. Everybody pays the same and everybody gets the same experience. It's not like the West End Theatre where the rich people, they pay 60, 70, 100, 150 quid and they get the good seats. And the poor people, they pay, still quite a lot of money and they get to sit up in the gods and they can't see very much. My goodness, the cinema is a kind of bizarre communist utopia. Think of that. Everybody pays the same. The student nurse and the hedge fund manager pay the same and they get the same. My God, if Jeremy Corbyn suggested that, he'd be attacked by the Daily Mail. What a crazy idea. Surely the rich people have got to have a better experience than the poor people. No, the cinema, for all its problems, is a democratic and meritocratic experience. Everybody gets the same experience of it. And it's widely available. It's not like writing about a restaurant or an art exhibition or the theatre, where you can read about it and you can dream on if you don't live in London, if you haven't got a few bob. Whereas the cinema it's even relatively arcane films are available. The constituent part, which is what some people hate, but is important, is you have to give the reader some idea of what it's about. Now, that leads you into the most ugly and horrible minefield, which is the spoiler minefield, which is if you say anything at all about it, any information at all about it, you can be hammered for spoilers. And that has become the number one trolling device for people, I think, in the whole area of cinema criticism. It's become weirdly, it started life, in my opinion, as a legitimate consumer complaint, basically. People are saying, look, these motormouth journalists are giving away the bloody plot. They're giving away the ending. They're spoiling our enjoyment of it. But then, like a kind of hideous kind of virus, the idea of spoilers metastasized into this all-purpose assault weapon that people could just troll you with, basically. It didn't matter what you said. It didn't matter whether you liked the movie or didn't like the movie. Usually it's about a superhero movie which you've seen ahead of all the fans. But that the absolute number one thing is spoilers. And it's become, unfortunately, it's become something which has gone almost beyond the idea of dialogue. You can't really say, well, I have to say something. And if I say something, I get attacked for spoilers. But anyway, there we are. That's again, that's, as they say, first world problems for a critic. But it is a problem in a way. But that's something that a critic has to say. It has to say something about the film. It has to give some idea. And in a way, it's almost not it's not so much a critical responsibility. It's almost like a journalistic responsibility. You have to say something about what the film is so that your comments about its generic history make some sort of sense. You have to take it apart. You have to give an idea of its place in history as to say what genres of film, what are the assumptions of this film, what assumptions what are the assumptions that it's meeting, what are the tastes that it proposes to gratify. These are the things that really make no sense until you say something about what happens in the movie. So that's part of it. And then you have to balance basically what in cinema terms would be the wide shot and the close-up, basically. You have the wide shot, you give a large sense of the canvas of the movie, of its larger forms, its formal sense, its sort of shape, as it were, what it's like, what it's about, and then you zoom in for close-up detail about how those effects are achieved. And along with all that, you have to tap dance. You have to be an entertaining writer. You have to put on a song and dance show, because otherwise nobody's going to be interested in what you write. You have to, basically, you are operating in a kind of free market where you have to grab the reader and say, stop what you're doing and listen to me and read all the way through to the end, when there's absolutely no compulsion for any reader to read you to the end. They don't have to. They could click on something else. They could turn the page. They don't have to. A lot of people come from doing film studies where they have to write essays and their college professor has to read them. And sometimes people have to make a kind of mental jump from that world to the world of journalism where nobody has to read you at all. So you have to get their attention. And sometimes you have to use the kind of broad kind of musical bag of tricks of comedy and brashness or whatever to get their attention. You have to do it, otherwise nobody's going to pay attention to you in some ways. I don't mind star ratings. I like them. It's not cool to like this. Everybody I've ever had a conversation with has said, "Oh, aren't star ratings awful? Oh, they're so reductive." Are they? I don't think they are. I think what's reductive is retreating into ambiguity, because there's something which, again, I have to say, I like it in a way because it's a sort of consumer. There's a consumer angle which I don't turn my nose up at 1 minute. Many and many a time I've read superbly written film reviews which retreat into ambiguity. For example, especially if they're writing about some big blockbuster, they write a very witty piece, but which is really ambiguous. So to get them a get-out clause either way. So if this big blockbuster turns out to be a massive flop, then their piece has been a witty denigration. If it turns out to be a colossal success, then their piece has been a very witty and affectionate celebration of how wonderful it is. And many a time, I've read a piece, great, magazine piece about review of a film, and thought, and I've got to the end of it, I thought that's great, but I've wanted to call the critic up on the phone and say, hey, great piece, just as a matter of interest, is it any good? Do you think it's good? I mean, seriously, And so the thing about star ratings is they force the critic to make the evaluation. And that's that is a responsibility which a critic is being a wimp if he or she shies away from. And the star rating does clarify the mind. I mean, I agree. I mean, star rating can be reductive. And some people can just read the star rating and not bother reading the prose. But reading the prose is your job. You're the prose stylist. You're the wordsmith. If the reader isn't reading you, that's not the star ratings fault. That's your fault for not being a good enough writer. If you're a good enough writer, they'll read you. For a critic, for writing a review, yes, I think it's one of the sinews of criticism is saying whether or not you think it's any good. Because there's an element of dishonesty in pretending that you don't have any opinions at all. For any you and I can go see a film and think that it isn't any good or that it is good, and we can discuss why it is any good. Why should we decide that there is something wrong or questionable in a type of criticism which insists on exactly that? I don't have any problem at all with that, and I think it should. I mean, people understand that critics have their own bugbears, they have their own eccentricities, they have their own subjective oddities, which means that they like some things which other people don't like. But again, I think readers are intelligent enough to understand that. So no, I think a critic should offer a vigorous, clear, and robust opinion about whether or not something is good or not. Only once, many, many, many years ago, only once, it's so long ago that I can hardly remember, but as I say, I was having lunch with somebody who shall be nameless, but I had given a bad review to a film at a festival, and this person had was bringing the movie to the UK, and in the most feather-like way said, "Do you think there might be any possibility that you might possibly smile on this film?" And I said, no, I hate it. I did, but what? And then this person said something very interesting. They said, but we're both in the same business. And I had to say, no, we're not. You're in the cinema business and I'm in the journalism business. We're in different businesses. Since I began this job in 1999, the big change that's happened is it used to be that people would see the review and then see the film. Now that's completely turned around. People see the film and then they read the review. It used to be that they would get the Dead Tree newspaper and rustlingly turn to the reviews, the arts pages at the back in that quaint way that we used to, and read the review and be terribly interested and go and see a film, and that would be that. Or they would be furious. They would walk out thinking that was a terrible film. Why on earth did I believe that idiot of a critic? Now, people have got a very clear idea of the kind of film that they want to see in that initial sense. There's all sorts of information from all sorts of media telling them what sort of film they want to go and see, what's coming up. They go to see it, and then they read the review. They, on their way out of the cinema, they will literally take their smartphone or their tablet out of their pocket, and they will call up dozens and dozens of reviews, and they will get stuck in. They will read it and they will get stuck in below the line, or they will get stuck in on social media and they will tweet you and say, you're a complete moron. That's absolutely stupid. I think a critic has to be ready to do anything and everything. A critic can't just be in print. I think you have to be doing everything. You have to do podcast, you have to do audio, you have to do video, you have to do online, you have to do everything. And that's where it's happening. And you have to have some sense. I think critics are going to have to evolve in that they have got some sense of what it is to make a film. I think it would be great if all critics should do a course, one of those courses that the Rain Dance Company do, of making a short film. I think that would be great. I'd love to see them, all critics, do that and have to make a short film. And they would find out, possibly for the first time in their lives, what all these terms mean that they've been using. When they talk about the editing, how a film is edited, they will find out for the first time what that means, or what a cinematographer actually does, or what a director does. I still think a lot of critics are even the savviest ones, are as innocent as children about what a producer and a director actually do. I think the non-professional critic sometimes does very, very well outside of the conventional sphere of print. The YouTuber, as it were, can be brilliant in a way that the stuffy old print critic can't in front of their camera on their iPhone. Sometimes they can be absolutely inspired and they can be fluent and smart and funny, and they can put the older guys absolutely to shame. But it has to be said, in terms of actual prose quality, that can come to pieces in your hands really. That can be very, very dodgy indeed. And sometimes you do appreciate a real writer, somebody who's had to fight to get their stuff published. See, that's a kind of Darwinian or evolutionary question, is that somebody who's come up in the print medium has had to fight to get their stuff published. They've had to convince 2 or 3 people that their stuff is good enough to get it into print in the first place. Whereas a blogger doesn't have that at all. They write the first thing they like and bang, it's up. It doesn't have to be edited. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to take it down and think, actually, no, that's no good. I need to rework that from top to bottom. They don't have that tradition. And so some of the prose quality of bloggers can be dodgy. It can be ropey. But as I say, sometimes the intuitive world of the new media, of just talking to camera and this sort of Snapchat generation, they can get it right in a way that the old-fashioned, as it were, sort of dead tree media people can't.